who are here.
Which one?
The Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit. That's a start. I will just say parenthetically, if you read The Hobbit and were disappointed, I don't blame you, because The Hobbit was actually written for children. The Lord of the Rings came later and is, well, it's just a whole lot more. How many people who have not read the novel have seen one or more of the films? Okay, good. I'm glad not all the hands went up, because the films, which are certainly well done, and I suppose if Peter Jackson got an Academy Award for the third one, it would be fruitless to argue the point. But the films are substantively different than the novels. So if it comes up today in our conversation, my job is to represent the novel. So if a comment comes up about, oh, well, Arwen saves Frodo on the horse. Well, that's not what happened in the novel. It's what happened in the movie. So I will be the one to try to keep true to this. And by the way, it's not a trilogy. It's a novel, according to Tolkien, even though it's referred to as a trilogy. There are 3 books of the 1,000 pages, but it's not a trilogy. So, well, why don't we get started? I was hoping. My name is Richard Parker, and I have the good fortune of being able to teach in this space, especially in the winter. So this is a comfortable room for me. I wanted to see if we could agree on a few things at the beginning, because the agreement is always nice. So would you say that MDI is a beautiful place? Yes. Okay, good. Would you say that we as humans face challenges, setbacks, defeats, and some successes? No argument there, right? Would you say that there are people in the world who ignore the common good for their own interests? I think so, yes, sounds good. And can we also agree that at times humans behave barbarically toward each other? So if you agree with all those statements, you also would agree with the compilers and the writers of myths, who also see that there are dangerously selfish people in the world. These are the enemies of the heroes on the hero's journey. And myths are designed to help us recognize that those who reject the common good, and then for us to develop strategies on how to counter them. To do this, we first have to determine the facts. And myths hold the world together because they teach us to accept the facts, and they teach us how to rise to the occasion for the common good. And this is pretty much a common, you can say these words about any myth that comes into your mind. There are always enemies. The enemies almost always are out for their own interest, don't care about other people. And the good guys and women are the ones who stand up and find ways to fight. Now, I had the good fortune, I want to define the word hero since it's all over this presentation. I had the good fortune to have a really terrific professor a very long time ago. And he asked us a class of about 20 graduate students to spend an hour and a half coming up with a definition of a hero. And we did, and it was interesting and frustrating because we had to agree on it. It's kind of like a jury, we had to be unanimous. But I've remembered what we came up with as a definition. I think it's pretty good, and it certainly relates to what we're talking about today. So the definition we came up with, and by the way, hero, male or female. I'm going to use he as a pronoun a bunch. Please understand it's collective. Yes, Tolkien leans heavily towards male characters, but I'm going to talk about how that's ameliorated through his philosophy. But the definition for hero is one who does what must be done for the common good, regardless of the consequences, and without desire for personal gain or recognition. So in other words, a hero is a selfless person who's not looking to gain anything, who's going to stand up to nihilism, selfishness. And Joseph Campbell is the scholar who coined the term the hero's journey. The other term that goes with it is the monomyth. His lifelong study was to examine world myths to see what elements they shared, and his seminal work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, provides evidence which supports his claim that the great myths of the world follow a very similar narrative pattern, which includes, and some of the stuff is on here for the visual learners, a call to adventure, the initiation or trial, and the return. As Campbell said himself, the passage of the hero may be over ground incidentally. Fundamentally, it is inward. So metaphorically, the hero's journey is the journey back home to your true self. And at some level, one could argue this is the transformative journey we are all on as human beings. So one of the reasons why novels like The Lord of the Rings and films like Star Wars resonate so deeply is because we have heard these stories before many times. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung went so far as to say that myths have their own living momentum, dancing within our unconscious minds and in the collective unconscious. In other words, these mythic tales reside somehow in our consciousness as part of the collective unconscious that resides in all humans from the beginning of time. And the same basic story is repeated. The hero's journey can be found in fairy tales and mythology. In fairy tales, the hero achieves a domestic or micro triumph, like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. She does not save the world, but comes home after being lost in Oz. In mythology, the hero achieves a world or historical macro triumph, like Luke Skywalker, who saves the world from the evil empire. By the way, George Lucas has said many times that Campbell influenced his writing of the Star Wars films. And if I was just a little bit more interested in the Star Wars films, I could have easily chosen that as the model for this hero's journey. I like printed material. So what I'm going to do now is give you a most cursory view of the hero's journey. And I want to say at the outset, I'm not an expert on this topic. I'm just a high school English teacher who's spent a lot of time reading and thinking. And I'm not like a college professor whose area of expertise was mythology. So that's my apology. So first is the call to adventure, which comes after we have met the hero at home and seen him as an ordinary person. And by the way, I'm going to get to Tolkien. I'm going to do Campbell first. It's going to take me another 10 minutes or so. Then we're going to get right into Tolkien. And I'm going to use different examples in this section, primarily Star Wars and The Wizard of Oz, just because they're kind of part of the common culture. So again, the call begins with the ordinary person at home. And as Campbell says, the call signifies that destiny has summoned the hero and transferred his spiritual center of gravity from within the pale of his society to a zone of the unknown. This summons can come from a higher being, like from Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, or it can be accidental, like the blow to the head that Dorothy suffers during the tornado. Either way, the assignment is clear, and circumstances require the hero to rise to the occasion to meet the challenge. Often there is a refusal at first, as initially Luke refuses Obi-Wan Kenobi's request to help save Princess Leia until he discovers the death of his aunt and uncle. The refusal is essentially a reluctance to give up putting one's own interests first. True heroes do not act for personal gain, as we said before, for common good. Some further notions about the call. First, the hero must desire to meet the call to hold the world together or to save the world, as the example with Luke from the world from domination by the evil empire. It's essential for the hero to address the facts in order to succeed. There can be no exaggerated sense of self or manipulation of the facts. And just parenthetically, in Lord of the Rings, both Saruman and Boromir doom themselves to failure when they don't accept the facts of the influence of the ring. The hero's journey argues that getting the facts right is critical. And just an aside, I think one of the interesting things, maybe sad things about American culture today is there seems to be an impulse to interpret facts and to accept myths literally. And of course, it gets you in a lot of trouble when you begin interpreting facts. So the hero's journey always begins with the facts. And I'm going to jump ahead just to make this comment now. The longest chapter in The Lord of the Rings is the second chapter. It's called The Shadow of the Past. It's the longest because Gandalf lays out all the facts. That's the first thing he does with Frodo. And this is something you'll find in all of the hero's journey stories, that the facts is where it begins. The hero must be able to withstand the forces of evil and their temptations. The hero must be able to discern appropriate allies and accept their assistance. The hero's journey is almost never a John Wayne story, and I know that dates me, but John Wayne movies, he always did it alone. It's never the case in the hero's journey. Even if you want to go to Odysseus and look at Odysseus basically traveling alone, Athena was right there with him the whole time, the goddess. So he doesn't do it alone at all. And finally, the hero must be willing to do whatever it takes to accomplish the call, even if it means their own death. Next comes finding a mentor or supernatural aid. And this is a key component of the quest. It's important to understand that without this, the hero has no chance of succeeding. Campbell said that the mentor represents the benign protective power of destiny. Of supernatural aid, he says the hero moves in a dream landscape of curiously fluid, ambiguous forms where he must survive a succession of trials. He here discovers that there is a benign power everywhere supporting him. Much more on this later. Next comes the crossing of the first threshold from the known world into the unknown, which often occurs at night. There can be no turning back at this point. The initiation or ordeal is the longest part of the story and includes the passing of threshold guardians. And in addition, there are trials, tests, temptations, battling enemies, and joining with allies. Luke gathers members of the Alliance and robots. Dorothy partners with the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Lion. There are usually powerful gifts and weapons associated. The lightsaber for Luke, the ruby slippers for Dorothy. There is often a meeting with the goddess. As Campbell says, the hero may derive hope and assurance from the goddess by whose magic he is protected through all the frightening experiences. The ordeal is not the battle itself, and it is arduous. Often this is into the underworld or into a cave, symbols of the most dangerous places in the universe. For Luke, into the Death Star. For Dorothy, the confrontation with the Witch of the East. Into hell for Dante in the Divine Comedy. Into Hades for Odysseus. You could go on and on and on with this particular motif. And then the abyss, or the final battle, which is symbolic dismemberment or death. Confrontations with Darth Vader and the Witch of the East are moments of the abyss. Here the hero must face his greatest fear, his or her greatest fear. Often the hero will leave with a prize. And sometimes there's one more final act after the abyss. Often there is a physical and mental price to be paid because the hero is always transformed in the process. Finally, there is often a rescue or rebirth, resurrection, transformation. And lastly is the all-important return, which includes the road back where the mentors and supernatural powers are left behind. The hero returns to their world with an expansion of consciousness and ability to restore the world. And again, just parenthetically, this is where Jackson, I think, made his biggest mistake in the Lord of the Rings films, because crucial to the hero's journey is the return to see, okay, what did all of this do to transform our hero? And Jackson leaves out Frodo and his colleagues mopping up the Shire and cleaning it up and restoring order and throwing out the bad guys. Because myths are meant to be interpreted, it's crucial that readers turn the story to themselves. We can best do this if we have tried to be every character in the story. The writers want us not only to identify our own strengths, but also our weaknesses and faults. When we finish reading about the hero's journey or watching a film, several questions become personally important. What thresholds are before you in your life now? What obstacles and barriers are in the way? What strengths will support you and what shortcomings will be a problem? Which allies can you look to for assistance? Perhaps there is supernatural aid available. Hero's journey asks us, who do we want to be at the important moments? How do we wish to show up in the world? The classic hero's journey is on an epic scale. Larger than life heroes, larger than life enemies on a larger than life stage fighting a larger than life battle. And you might think, well, what does this have to do to me? Now, of course, if you were taking a myth literally, you'd exclude yourself in the equation. But if you're to interpret the myths, you can see that as a common person, you have your own mission, your own journey. Campbell, Homer, Tolkien all knew that their audience is made up of common folk. And their intention is to inspire us, normal people, to rise to the occasion to hold our world together in the best ways we can. We do this in America by being informed of the facts, by following laws, by voting, by stopping at stop signs, by being kind, and by understanding that it is only when the common good is paramount that we can thrive. True heroism is everyday people doing their part. So I think a mistake some people make reading works like The Lord of the Rings is just thinking, well, I'm not in the story. And perhaps this is one of the reasons Tolkien chose the hobbits to be kind of the central focus. These are small people in a very big world, but they're still doing their part. And in fact, more than their part. They are very much integral in the process of saving the world. So that's a whole lot on Joseph Campbell in a short time. Are there any questions or comments or observations about Joseph Campbell or some of the things that I've said?
I was thinking as you were describing that, having not read Lord of the Rings, I can confession or any Campbell's work of music and great music, and how we start out in major chords and then go into minors and dissonance and go on a journey and then come back to major and a resolution, and it's all well and good at the end of the song, and how we are instinctively drawn to that musically. So I think that's just an observation.
That's so cool. You know, it makes me, you know, and this is just what Campbell did. You know, Campbell didn't start out going, oh, I'm going to discover the hero's journey, right? He started out being a student of myth. And what he saw were patterns, which is what you've just described. And perhaps you had this experience when you were a kid. I think at the time I was probably 10 or 11, I noticed that the mackerel sky clouds at night looked just like the low tide sand flats on the beach. And I had noticed that the way the snow is drifted by the wind is just the way sand is drifted by the wind. And so it's finding these connections that speaks really to beauty with a capital B, which is a big part of what The Lord of the Rings is all about. And by that, I mean sensing the interconnection of things, sensing the beauty that can be created by a human with the right heart. So Jay, thank you so much. That's a very, I listen to music, but I'm not conversant enough to even say, oh, well, that was wonderful. But I can say that sounds really cool. Any other, yeah.
Which I love the intrinsic code of the paradigm, like the way in which, like while it applies to myth, that, and if you're careful to, right, assent to facts and interpret myth, you'll be able, it seems like we do find the aspect of myth that does attain in reality when you do that the way in which, like, working toward the mundane and simple ends that we have in human life. Like, when we're faced with that, there is a kind of like almost mythological or mythical like elevation of the world, be over and above just the restoration of things we're leaving aiming at. That there is this like kind of cerebral, like sometimes you're like, wow, there's something better here than just things working out, you know.
That's so cool, Anthony. Anthony's a great student of Tolkien, so he knows the novel really well. And I'm going to get into this with Sam in a little while. This concept of hope, especially in the face of insurmountable odds. So yeah, thank you.
But just the idea that something like this could actually attain about the world, it's like, I mean, that's something else. I mean, that's why it resonates with us in the stories, that there's something factual about that. Yes, it's just very enjoyable thing.
Excellent.
We just look for these patterns. I was thinking of Harry Potter the whole time you were going through this too, because she did this exact same thing with her 7 books and her other books. But I like the fact that you're talking about Joseph Campbell, because even just bringing that to light to people, you start seeing those patterns. That's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, all right, well, let's talk about Tolkien a little bit. Because let me just say that the novel does stand alone, all 1,000 pages of it, but and I'm not going to try to fill in the gaps, but just so you know, Tolkien wrote 10,000 years of history before this novel. So in fact, this novel is in medias res. It begins in the middle of things. So I need to make sure you understand a couple of things about what came before, because you can't understand the Lord of the Rings without it. And just by the way, Homer didn't give you a lesson on Greek mythology before he dove into his tale. He assumed that you knew it, that his audience, and of course they did. And Tolkien does the same thing. He just dives into it. But without getting into any great detail, I want you to understand that this is a universe that was created by a god. And the god has two different names. The one I like is Eru, E-R-U, because I can remember it. I can't remember the other one. And this god literally sang the universe into being. Now, if you've read The Lord of the Rings, and you've seen the 30 or 40 songs that are included, you might have been bored by the songs, you might have skipped the songs, but what Tolkien is actually doing with the songs is he's reminding you that this is a universe created by music. Now, there are going to be a number of references in The Lord of the Rings about unseen powers. When Gandalf comes back from essentially death after battling the Balrog, he says, they sent me back until my work is done. Well, if someone sent him back from death, and by the way, Gandalf's not a human, he's a Maiar, he's actually divine, gets complicated. But if someone sent him back, that means there's even a higher power beyond Gandalf, which of course there is. So that's an important point because we're going to touch on that when we get into looking at the hero's journey. Tolkien, basically, as a student and teacher of mythology, he said to himself at one point, why don't we have a story for us, Northern people? And I am, in this instance, yes, I'm talking about people with white skin. That's what he was referring to when he wrote this. He was creating a mythology for Northern people. And for everyone in this room, if you go back far enough, you're going to find you had ancestors probably in Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, and we all come from that place. That's why we're called Caucasians. So what Homer did, Tolkien did the same thing. What Tolkien did is he took a number of different traditions from Northern cultures, like Finland, especially in this particular epic that was written in Finland, the Norse mythology and the Celtic mythology. And he took bits and pieces of the themes and he melded this into this world of Middle-earth. He is also crystal clear that he did not write an allegory. So be sure not to think Hitler is Sauron, or World War I or World War II is the battle against Mordor. This doesn't mean these things aren't maybe somewhat related, but Tolkien's emphatically stating this is not allegory, so don't pretend that it is. In addition to the Northern myths mentioned, Tolkien also drew on other myths, especially with the motif of the descent into the underworld. I referenced that before, but I'm going to do it a little bit more right now. Orpheus, Odysseus, Aeneas, Gilgamesh, Jesus with the harrowing of hell, Dante. In Lord of the Rings, Tolkien had 3 different journeys into the underworld. The journey into the mines of Moria was the first. Number 1B would be Gandalf falling down with the Balrog into essentially the abyss. Sam and Frodo in Shelob's cave would be the next underworld journey. And Aragorn's journey to ally with the dead under the mountain would be the third. Now, Jung said that these underworld journeys represent the shadows of ourselves. So when we interpret the myth of the Lord of the Rings, we can ask about our own shadow side. Remember, Campbell said the hero's journey is fundamentally inward. So these motifs going down in an interpretive sense is the opportunity for each one of us to look at the dark, not to get into Darth Vader, but I just did, into the dark side that is within all of us, as well as the light. Tolkien's going to spend much more time on the light. So let's start with Frodo. The call comes in chapter 2, which I mentioned before, the shadow of the past. And just by the way, in terms of images that Tolkien uses throughout to highlight evil, shadow is kind of the key, one of the key descriptors. So when he entitles this chapter, The Shadow of the Past, it's going to be Gandalf talking about the facts, the history of the ring in particular. But the shadow and evil for Tolkien is the absence of, and it's really the absence of heart. It's the absence of caring, the absence of love. Now, Frodo's immediate reaction to the call is to try to give the ring to Gandalf. That's the refusal. And you might say, well, if Gandalf is divine, why doesn't he just take the ring? It's kind of like the same question. You get this. Why didn't the eagles just fly the ring into the cracks of doom and save everybody all the trouble? Well, the eagles and Gandalf are all Maiar. This is a category of divine being. And there are limits to what divine beings are permitted to do on the earth. So the reason the eagles didn't save the day is they're not allowed to save the day. And the reason Gandalf doesn't take the ring is, well, he's also smart. He knows if he takes the ring, it's going to have an influence on him, just like Galadriel coming up. But he also knows that he's not allowed to do that. It's his job as Maiar in this novel to help support the alliances that will be made by these disparate people, some of whom hate each other, like dwarves and elves. It's Gandalf's job to facilitate people coming together. He can't do it for them. So Frodo's immediate reaction is to give the ring to Gandalf. He refuses, of course. When that fails, he then accepts quickly. But let me ask you this. If you were told that you possessed a power that if it got into the wrong hands, who's looking for it, would be the end of the world, would you hang out at home for 5 months? Because that's what Frodo does. He stalls, he's reluctant. This is classic hero's journey, kind of drawn out a little bit. But his reluctance to leave is part of the refusal. He doesn't want to give up his life. He doesn't want to give up his own interests. And he has it pretty good. He's basically a young hobbit who's rich. He's got the nicest house and a pretty easy life. You can't blame him for wanting to hang on to it. And that hanging out for 5 months just about causes the end. But of course, that's going to happen frequently in the novel. There are constantly moments where they're a hair's breadth from getting caught, and mistakes are made, and people keep saying, oh no, I just made a mistake, this is the end. But this is the power of the unseen forces, the benign, divine forces of the universe supporting the good people who are trying to fight. That's why that keeps happening. The next issue in the hero's journey is mentor and supernatural aid. Gandalf kind of fits both categories, even though a lot of people might not realize that he's supernatural. But he is clearly the mentor, and also represents the supernatural aid. Other supernatural aid comes from the elves. You have to consider them supernatural. Why? They're immortal. They don't die. And the characters of the elves that you see in this novel are, in some instances, 6, in other 10, in others 15,000 years old, and they're not dying. And I could go down the path on that, but I won't. But this aid comes right away, and the key elves in this story who help Frodo, Gildor, who shows up on day 2 and basically saves him from the ringwraith. Glorfindel, not Arwen, who rides the horse that takes Frodo to Rivendell to save his life. Obviously, Elrond and Galadriel. And perhaps the most intriguing character of them all, I wish we had time to talk about Tom Bombadil. Jackson may be smart not to have put him in the movie, because that would have been needed at least half an hour to do him justice. And it'd be hard to do him justice because he's purposely ambiguous. Tolkien leaves him that way. But all I can say is that if there was anybody you want to hang out with, it's Tom Bombadil. And if you're not convinced, having read it, that he's got big power, imagine this. You're in the Barrow Downs. You're about to be killed by the Barrow Lights. You're at least 20 miles from Bombadil's house. Frodo sings the song, Bombadil teaches him, and guess how long it takes Bombadil to travel from his house to the Barrow Downs? About 5 seconds. So we're talking about serious power. And isn't Frodo lucky? See, he's got all these allies, and most of whom he doesn't even know. He didn't even know Bombadil existed. And then, of course, as I've said, the unseen forces, something else at work here, said Gandalf. How interesting. The key council that Elrond calls in Rivendell, he never called a council. He didn't invite anybody. Those people who show up obviously got the message from the unseen forces that they needed to get to Rivendell. Crossing the first threshold happens for Frodo, just like it does for Bilbo in chapter 1, jumping the low spot in the hedge at night, and then countless other thresholds. In fact, the narrative is just a series of thresholds. The initiation, the ordeal, is filled with doubts. Why? Because that's what it means to be a human, to have doubts. And if you notice, all of the major heroes have doubts. Even Gandalf the Maiar doesn't know what the outcome's going to be. Aragorn especially is filled with doubt. And so is Frodo, of course. The guardians that he encounters are pretty endless. It begins with the ringwraiths on the horses, the Barrow Wights. Gollum himself is a threshold guardian of sorts. Shelob for sure. Power, gifts, and weapons. Sting, the mithril shirt of armor, the phial of Galadriel. And what you find, we're not going to have time to look at what the phial of Galadriel is, but if you know the legendarium, again, this part of the Silmarillion, you would know that the light of in the phial comes from the light of the trees that were destroyed thousands of years before. It's a magical light. It's a restorative light. And the reason I'm lingering here for a moment is that there's always a new beginning almost on every page in The Lord of the Rings. You have to do the work to go and find out what that beginning is. But when you find that beginning, you'll find there's another one before. Allies, so many. Most interesting with Frodo is even his shadow self, or his future possible self, Gollum, becomes an ally. Temptations for Frodo. Twice. Rivendell, he doesn't want to leave Rivendell. Who would? He doesn't want to leave Lorien. Who would? Meeting the goddess for Frodo happens with Galadriel. She too is Maiar. No, I'm sorry. She's not Maiar, but she has similar power to Gandalf within the world of Middle-earth. She's an elf. But she, although not literally a goddess within a kind of a standard definition, she fills that role in the hero's journey. And she provides views of the possible future and powerful gifts. As I mentioned before, the file being the key thing. Galadriel is also a ring bearer, along with Gandalf and Elrond. Tolkien doesn't really focus that too much, but it's big in the legendarium. The final struggle or the abyss is with Sam. The dismemberment comes at the end. And for Frodo, the dismemberment is literal when Gollum bites off his finger. The whole notion of dismemberment is that within the hero's journey, when you go to the max, you confront what you have to confront. The old self dies because you're no longer that person. You're now the transformed person. And it's a nice touch that he had him bite off the finger just to take a member away, for those who are aware of that term. The rescue happens with the eagles, and the rebirth for Frodo is really the healing he gets from the king, which of course is part of Aragorn's legitimacy, the fact that he's not only fighter and king, but also healer. And then the return is as you'd expect. The supernatural aid is left behind. Gandalf is left behind. Even Legolas, the immortal elf, is not there. They restore the Shire. But sometimes the hero's journey extracts such a price from the hero that not only does the hero not get any recognition or reward, it's even worse than that, that the hero can't even enjoy going back to a normal life. And Tolkien does a wonderful job with this. If you're looking at the last pages of The Lord of the Rings, Frodo is completely unknown in the Shire as being the hero that he is. And he does nothing to change that, which is such lovely humility. But essentially, the price that Frodo pays in his journey is that he can't stay. And so his departure to the Grey Havens is really it's just a metaphor for death. I mean, it's literally he's headed for his death. He's going to go to the Undying Lands. He's been granted that, but he's not going there to become immortal. Gandalf is, Galadriel is, the other people on the ship will be. They already are immortal, so there's no change for them. Frodo's going to his death, as is Bilbo. So then there's Sam. Everyman. Sam is really us. The least special, the most normal, and perhaps the most endearing character. The call for him is accidental. He doesn't really get a call. He gets a command from Gandalf because he was eavesdropping. He has to go, but he accepts it. And his quest is one of selfless service to Frodo. And although, again, this is an allegory, Tolkien has said many times that he designed Sam after the Batman of World War I. And the Batman was that enlisted man who would go into the trenches to support the officers in World War I, often to their death, of course. And so that's really the model. And keep in mind that Tolkien served at the Battle of the Somme. He went through the whole worst part of World War I, and there's no question that influences the rest of his life. In a sense, his hero's journey, he comes back transformed. Refusal for Sam. If you're racking your brain, don't bother. There's no refusal. His heart is so good that his care for Frodo is so strong that he agrees, he pledges never to leave him, and he never wavers. The mentor and supernatural aids, pretty much the same for Frodo. The initiation ordeal. The most important thing about this, and Anthony was kind of getting into this optimism before, is not only will Sam support Frodo throughout, he of the two is the only one who keeps alive the possibility, the hope that they'll go home someday. Frodo is ready to give up long before the final his final failure, no offense, but he does fail at the end in some ways. But Sam never wavers, and it's because of the quality of his heart. Although there are momentary thoughts of glory from Sam with the ring in Shelob's cave, the narrator says, in that hour, it was the love of his master that helped most to hold him firm. And Sam says to himself, in any way, all those notions are only a trick. So even in that high stress moment, Sam understands the facts, is able to discern the circumstance he's in, and does not try to become the ruler of the world, which his fantasies allow him to carry on for about 10 seconds. The return of Sam is different than Frodo. He returns home to marriage, to children, and his coming home is an example of balancing the male and the female energies. And just quickly, the Norse energy, which is throughout this tale, is all about no matter how bad it's going to be, it's going to get worse. And you just carry on. That's the Norse impulse. The Celtic impulse is, which is masculine, of course. The Celtic impulse is feminine. It's connectivity, it's love, it's caring, it's kindness. So when Sam comes home to marry and have children, and we feel so sad that, you know, Frodo's away and he's missing his friend, he's actually creating the future there. Other examples of this male-female balance would be initially Bombadil and Goldenberry, which is the first power couple we meet. And then, of course, there's Celeborn and Galadriel in Lorien. And then, if you notice, the novel ends with all these men and women coming together. Aragorn and Arwen, who basically has no lines in The Lord of the Rings, by the way, Arwen. Faramir and Eowyn. And there's one more. There's one more marriage going on at the end. I'm losing my memory. So the return home for Sam is very satisfying. He uses the gift of the goddess to restore the trees of the Shire. And perhaps he's really the best model of a human in the novel. And if you're wondering who Tolkien repeatedly declares as the hero of the story, it's Sam. So a couple of quick things about Aragorn, and then I'll leave some time for questions. I've got about 13 minutes left. Aragorn, you know, the call for Aragorn is really a lifetime of calling. He always knew who he was. He was always reluctant to become who he was supposed to become, but there's no surprise going on with Aragorn. I suppose you could say Elrond and Gandalf are the ones who really put the call to him. When even the mistakes always lead to a good outcome. And he's reluctant to see himself as king until the quest is completed and Sauron is dead, or it's a little ambiguous about what happens to Sauron. I hate to say it, but evil doesn't get destroyed in this universe. It just comes back later. And that's part of what's in here. Sauron's about the third iteration of bad guy. So he's not gone. The point I'm making about Aragorn is his humility was such that he camps in a tent outside of Minas Tirith after the big battle on the Plenar field, because he doesn't want to in any way exceed anyone's expectations at that point. Mentor and supernatural aid for Aragorn are much the same. Crossing the first threshold for him, you know, you got to figure that's decades before the action. But if you really had to pick with the novel, you might say leaving Bree with the hobbits crossing a threshold, because he's taking them on, knowing that they're incompetent at that point in the wilderness. You might pick at the first encounter with the ring wraiths on the battle the initiation ordeal again for decades before. Power, gifts, and weapons. Of course, Elendil's sword, the sword that was broken, that's reforged. It was owned by Isildur's father. The silver brooch with the green stone that Arwen gives him. No, that's in the movie, sort of. Galadriel gives him the brooch. There's no little jewel around his neck from Arwen. Allies, winning over the hobbits. You know, it's interesting at the beginning, Aragorn is just a model of diplomacy. He's got to win over all these people. He's got to win over the hobbits and in the end, in the most stressful circumstance, which he accomplishes. Then he's got Boromir, who's in line to be steward of Gondor, when he's Aragorn going to leap over his head, and he has to earn his trust. He has to do the same with Éomer, the warrior from Rohan. He has to do the same with Theoden, the king of Rohan. And then the toughest ally he has to convince of all is this army of the dead. And he does it all with humility, collaboration. He said, just, you know, it might be a good character for the CEOs of the world to study, because his leadership is just wonderful. The trials are numerous. The most crucial would be when he looks into the Palantir to confront Sauron before they actually march on the gate. And then the return without the divine help of Gandalf, he takes the throne, he restores order to Middle-earth. But let me stop there and see if there's some questions or comments. And again, if you've got to go somewhere, feel free to go. No one's a captive here. Thanks for coming. Questions or comments? Disagreements? Yes, Anthony.
Well, to revisit the first point that you made about because I think it's almost like at the root of why this kind of why this material is so intriguing. The point that you made about the kind of American error of taking particular myths and asserting them as fact. And then also then looking at facts and saying we can just interpret those and can, you know, change them. I think once you've overcome that, once you've gotten out of that, you know, that disjunction, you're free then to understand, like to kind of enter into the question of to what extent is this paradigm, like I guess the chicken and egg problem of like, are humans like in some real sense mythical or stories where like my point is just there's something like really you know, like I'm just kind of drawing it out so a bit enough, but like once you're done asserting a particular myth as the true myth, right? It seems like you're free to enter into the question of like, I mean, it's mysterious that humans have come up with this, and I don't think the origins probably stories. I think the origins human spirit that then produces stories based on what we experience in living life. And it's just there's something really paradoxical about that, though. If just to go back and apply all of this kind of large scale, big world stuff to like small, monotonous, mundane life, small scale, there must be something mythical about all that, though, in some real way. There must be a way in which that ordinary world that we live in discloses something mythical, mythological, and transcendental, because if it didn't, then we wouldn't come up with this, it would seem. So it's just, I wanted to present that as kind of perhaps at the root of why I'm even interested in this in the first place.
Yeah, very interesting idea. I think my response to that, Anthony, is also that, you know, this is kind of what Jung was talking about with the collective unconscious. You know, Jung's idea basically is that that we essentially through DNA have inherited DNA from all of our ancestors going back, and it goes back a very long way. Ancestry.com doesn't get you back to a couple hundred years. It's not even a millisecond from what we're talking about. So the notion is that this, what exists in the collective unconscious is a is an accumulation of truth and understanding. And Jung would argue that somehow magically these myths come from that well, which is the reason they resonate, and one of the reasons they resonate. I think using the word transcendent is great. I think this is, can this be proven? No, I mean, the scientists today, the one thing they figured out a whole lot, but they don't know much about consciousness.
Yeah.
And
No, it's just interesting, and those are the things that we would put in the category of common good. Or if you think about it, they're goods that secure conditions for the pursuit of higher goods, like the kind of peace that we want to have with each other. It's like presumably that's for the sake of something even better than that, but what that is exactly is kind of no good question.
it's a work in progress, right? And I think now, my own 2 cents in our political climate, we seem to somehow there seems to be an endorsement that doing your own thing and getting yours is okay. And I'm not trying to say it's not okay to pursue your own interests, but without the common good as the umbrella, it can't lead to a good place. And that's what Tolkien's writing about.
I mean, if your point with Sam as the hero is true, he's the most other-oriented character. Because he's not even, I mean, Frodo's oriented toward the world, but Sam is looking towards Frodo.
Yeah.
It's much more microscopic.
Yeah.
Thing,
And can you think of a place in the novel where Sam is looking for something for what he does? Never. I mean, many of them don't, but yeah, he's a pretty special cat. Well, let me just end by saying that if you haven't read the novel, I would encourage you to do it. I'm sorry you weren't here last winter. I taught the novel in 9 classes here in this room. And we just scratched the surface. What was that, 15 hours? We really just scratched the surface. So there's a lot here. And the primary message, I think, is that to come home to your true self means to rise to the occasion for the common good. And very ironically, this winter, I'll be teaching Moby Dick in this room, which is the counterpoint to the Lord of the Rings, because no one rises to the occasion, and you get to see what disaster ensues. So, well, thanks a lot for coming, everybody, on a summer afternoon. And thank you online, whoever's there, if you're still there, thanks for coming.